Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Imogen Ragone, who's an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. And we're going to talk today about a book that we've both read recently. I think Imogen perhaps in more detail than myself, called The Posture Workbook by Carolyn Nicholls, who's an Alexander teacher in Brighton, England. So we're going to talk a little about this book and about posture in general. Imogen, welcome to the show.
Oh, glad to be here, Robert.
Could you give our listeners a super short definition of the Alexander technique to start with?
Okay, yes, the Alexander technique briefly is a way of learning to identify and change your own sort of poor physical habits, posture, coordination, reaction.
Right.
That's it. Yep.
And that's good. And of course, one of the words you used there was posture.
hmm
And in this, of course, the title of this book is The Posture Workbook. I think that posture, I think most people have perhaps a view of what posture is that is not really in line with Alexander thinking, or I would say in line with the real situation. How would you define posture, and how would you see that definition as being a bit different from what a lot of people think posture is?
Um, yeah, I agree with you that there's before I define it, I think there's two things about posture and a kind of common um, way of seeing it. One is that people think about it as something very static,
A position.
a position, which in one way it is, but it isn't a fixed position. I would say that's a distinction.
Right.
But the other is that there is a growing recognition generally that posture is really important. I see it more and more in kind of news items on health and well-being. I don't know if you've kind of noticed
Oh,
that
yes,
too.
absolutely.
But I think, unfortunately, most people don't really know how to um, really address their posture issues in a way that's sustainable and comfortable and manageable.
Right. I
Uh,
mean, I find that whenever you mention the word posture to people, they'll often sort of do what they think of as standing up straight,
mhm.
and usually that's
People, yeah, it's usually always a stiffening and a tensing of the body, which is
exactly.
not what I would define as a healthy, good posture. But it might, to people on the outside, look more upright than being slumped. And it is more upright than being slumped, but it's still not really upright in a very dynamic, fluid way.
Or
It's
a
not,
way that most people could actually sustain even if they wanted to.
yeah, exactly, because you're using so much tension to hold yourself there. It's not sustainable. And I think that's where the Alexander technique comes in as a really wonderful tool to improve your posture because you're improving it by letting go of tension, basically.
Exactly.
Letting go of inappropriate tension. Yes,
Inappropriate tension. Yeah, and that actually is kind of a key aspect of the Alexander technique in general, I would say. And certainly
absolutely.
when it comes to posture, I think most people have an idea they're going to fix it somehow by making a fairly dramatic change, pulling their shoulders back or whatever. But I think from an Alexander perspective, what they're really just doing is rearranging tensions in their body to
hmm
make themselves perhaps look better in some ways. Someone
hmm
who's standing up stiffly straight might look better than someone who's slouching,
hmm
but
But it's
really
still not the
it's not that
not the
great.
yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
And now Carolyn Nicholls in the book we're talking about devotes a fair amount of attention to talking about that.
Yes.
And
And I think, really, there's a large the book is really in two main sections, and the first section um, is actually the largest section, and really that whole section is to do with really explaining and redefining what posture is and its importance in everything we do, don't you think?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. And you were saying earlier that posture is very much in the news these days. I think there's a realization that it's not just sort of how you how you look in the simplistic
Hmm.
way of thinking of it, but it's really how you present yourself to the world and how people react to that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's completely tied in with body language.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, on the other thing, it's tied in with things that people might not connect with posture, like digestion. If you're always collapsed and slumped over, which would be considered poor posture, you're squashing all your digestive organs and that whole system. So that's going to be impacted. I don't think that's something people often think about. And there's all sorts of, you know, various health and well-being issues that are affected by our posture.
Well, breathing also,
Breathing.
for
Yes.
example.
Yeah.
I mean, really, anything that goes on inside your torso, which is breathing and digestion and all that
Hmm.
stuff, if you're slumping and compressing it, or if you're over straightening and compressing
Exactly.
it in a different way,
Hmm.
you're you're affecting those. And in fact, one of the things that people who take Alexander lessons or explore these ideas often notice when a teacher helps them or they figure out a useful way to make a change themselves, one of the most obvious first things a lot of people notice is that suddenly they're taking a deep breath without
Hmm.
planning on doing it. Their breathing just opens up.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely. And
yeah,
the other thing is that they'll discover that having good posture isn't hard work. And I think that's a common sort of what's the word? Misunderstanding about posture, that it's work to
it
have good
exactly.
posture.
I would
Yeah.
say that
Whereas it's really, if we can learn to let go of all the things that we don't need, the collapse or the tightening or the tension, that then there's a more innate good posture that just happens. And that's really a surprise for people, I think.
absolutely. In fact, they're very likely to be doing considerably less work
Hmm.
than they were even in their if what their default situation was slouching.
Hmm.
Uh, they're actually going to do less work and be more easily upright. Now,
Hmm.
there it doesn't. It's not like a total free thing. You have to do some mental work.
So that's where the work comes in,
Yeah.
and Carolyn Nicholls goes into quite a lot of detail about how important your thought process is to making these type of changes. So yes, the thinking part and the awareness
And
is
she,
is
yeah,
is a it's mental work, but it's not muscular work.
it's mental work, but um, it's not. I wouldn't describe
No,
it
it's
as
not heavy
heavy
concentrated work,
duty
but it is
mental
a
work.
sort of focus and awareness that's different than what you might be used to.
It's a skill. It's a
Yes.
skill that it takes a little while to learn, but once you learn it, it's incredibly easy to use.
And like anything, the more you skill, the more practice you get, the more it just becomes something that you can kind of have running in the background most of the time. Oh,
You can have it running
in
in
a
the
way,
background, and
it's
you can have it
it doesn't have
ready.
to be the forefront of your attention every minute of the day. So,
Right, you can have it ready to deploy
mhm.
whenever perhaps you notice that you're slouching a little or you feel a little pressure in your body. You can just very gently and easily come back to some pretty simple ways of thinking. So, I think we probably should speak a little bit more about the book itself because
Sure.
that's would I guess the question I would ask you, this book is pretty short,
Hmm.
50-ish pages. It's got a lot of nice
Yes.
illustrations. It's got some great
Yeah, case
personal
studies or
accounts.
yeah.
And I would say it's a fairly easy book to read, and
Hmm.
it does have some very practical suggestions. And also, you can also access um, some video material online if you buy the book. I haven't actually done that myself, but I'm imagine that's
Yeah,
pretty.
I've looked at that and it's quite nice. Some of the people in the case studies, you actually see them speaking
Hmm.
um, about what they went through or what they do.
Right,
In particular, the opera singer she's worked with.
right, right.
Um, and I think there's also a video of at least one or two of the exercises the that she recommends, and
Well,
that's
she
kind of
talks
what I would
about.
like to look at because she has the second part of the book is devoted to some postural exercises she recommends, and she recommends specifically what she calls her kind of 5 a day.
Mhm.
But the foundation of those exercises is what she calls active rest, and that's one common name for it. I often use the term constructive rest, which is a very common Alexander technique procedure because it is so useful. Um,
And so easy.
and so easy, but I think people often dismiss it because it seems too easy, but it is such a powerful tool to do to help yourself, to help your posture in a way that's, very easy. Exactly what you said. Yeah.
Right. Now, what would you, I guess one question I would be curious to get your answer to is for someone who is interested in improving their posture, do you think this would be the best or a very good first read?
Yeah, I think it really would because it's really putting posture in context of what's really going on.
Hmm.
And I do think if, I think a lot of people might just sort of scan through the first part and want to get straight to the exercises. But I think I recommend you don't do that because there's a lot of really great information in the first part. But I think even if you did that, the detailed instructions that go with the exercises still bring you to how you should be approaching them. And would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And I mean, would you also think that someone could get some useful information that they could apply just from this book, or do you
Yeah.
think ultimately they would really need to see a teacher,
If
Alexander teacher?
Well, I mean, as an Alexander technique teacher myself, I think you will always get more from having, attending lessons or classes with a teacher. But I definitely think you could really start working on your own this way.
I certainly, if you're in a location where there is no teacher,
Absolutely.
then this would be a great book to read. It's not I think it's like $20 roughly. It's not an expensive
I
book.
think it's even less than that, about 15 maybe, but or maybe
15,
something in
15
between. I'm not
pounds.
sure.
I'm just looking at the back. 15,
Oh, yeah.
14.99
You're
pounds.
right, 1995.
Right.
Okay. Amazon
Right.
often has deals that makes it a little less
Right.
expensive than that.
Right.
Um,
So you can get it on Amazon. We'll
yeah,
put
no,
we'll
I
put a
think you could
link
get a
to
lot
we'll
out
put a
of it,
link to it.
especially if you're willing to read and approach the exercises in a thoughtful manner, which is what is laid out in the book.
So, is there anything else that you'd like to say about the book other than a pretty powerful recommendation for sure?
The only other thing is more about the exercises that she gives in the second part is that I've tried them out all myself, and some of them was somewhat familiar to me as an Alexander Technique teacher, and some were not things I've specifically worked with. But it's given me as an Alexander teacher more things to kind of work with my students and give them things to do that they can sort of practice their Alexander Technique skills with specifically at home. And I think that's often helpful to people because, of course, Alexander Technique is something that you can apply to anything, anywhere. sitting here talking to you in this interview. But I think when you're very first starting off, that's so easy to forget so much. Having one or two specific things where you're going to really be approaching them and thinking about them from an Alexander Technique way is really useful, and that they're also exercises designed to help your posture. I think that it's very nice. So for me as a teacher, I think it's nice.
So we could recommend this book for Alexander teachers.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean a lot of the information will be reinforcing what you know, but I think especially some of these ideas for exercises is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's where we should bring our conversation to an end. My guest today has been Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware, and we've been talking today about a book called The Posture Workbook by Carolyn Nicholls, an Alexander teacher in Brighton, England. She runs a training course there. And if anything we've talked about interests you, you could certainly get the book. We'll put a link to where you could buy it on Amazon. If you want to follow up with actually having some Alexander lessons, if you're in Wilmington, we'll put a link to Imogen's site. And if you're anywhere else, we'll put a link to a site where you can find a teacher in your area and learn more about the Alexander Technique. Imogen, thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome.